And we're
Hey
live.
guys, welcome back to a new episode of Pacecast, our live podcast all about RC drifting every Tuesday night. Just a quick introduction. My name is Tijs. I'm from Enjoy RC, another channel you can find on YouTube. And then on the other side of my screen is James from RC Boss, and of course Pace, the channel you're watching right now. So yeah, we have another podcast for you prepared today. Last week we talked about all kinds of things. We had a Q&A special, so we had people sending in questions through the live chat, which obviously also is working today. So if you have any questions today, feel free to join in. And also some stuff we had before. But actually, we also had a question posted on the YouTube video from last week, which maybe it's nice to get to straight away. Um, James, do you have the question
Yeah, we
for us?
do. It came in
All right,
from
cool.
Zario, and he asked a question that we've both discussed, and we've come up with a very similar answer, which is what are the benefits to baking a motor? I've never really heard of that, to be perfectly honest, as a thing. The only thing that I know about motor temperatures is that generally with a high quality brushless motor, if you get it over about 100 degrees Celsius, maybe 120 degrees, the magnets within the motor start to lose their power and you damage the motor forever. So this is probably an old racing trick that I don't know about, but it's not something I'm going to recommend because I have no knowledge of what are the pros and cons or anything like that.
Baking a motor, yeah, it sounds like maybe baking a cake. But I mean, we've heard before about baking your bearings
Yep.
to maybe get old oil or
Yep.
something like that out of them. And a motor has bearings too, but I would say, yeah, don't give that a try
No. And
unless you can remove them safely. But
and just on a note with motor bearings is be very careful how you clean and oil them because they are incredibly important to the health of the motor. If they're a little bit damaged or if they're not greased very well and they start to eat themselves, your motor is going to explode very quickly. Generally, the number one cause of a catastrophic failure in terms of a motor actually exploding is because somebody changed the bearings or greased the bearings with something that is either too thick or can't withstand the heat, or just in some cases ran out when it warmed up and leaked out of the bearings. So yeah, be very careful with that sort of stuff. Zario also had some other questions for us. One was, what are the pros and cons of the new RevD spring retainers? Well, pros, they look really nice. They are more likely to be accurate and precise in terms of spring position because they're machined aluminium, so they will all be the same size and there won't be any flashing or anything like that on the plastic mold when you compare them to a standard plastic part. But generally they're just that they are designed to sit the springs, the RevD springs, at the right sort of in the right position on the damper when you're using the intended dampers. Generally, spring retainers are often available in different sizes to let you move the spring up or down to run a shorter spring or a longer spring. And these are obviously set up perfectly for the RevD spring set that also launched around the same time. Cons? I can't really think of any.
If you're using them with springs that are the wrong length for the retainers,
Yeah.
so either too long or too short, all you're really doing is just adjusting preload, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's not that much different from, for example, the MST spring retainers that have, what is it, a 2 millimeter drop that were
Yes.
developed for the longer springs.
Yeah.
Back then they had the 32, I think,
The
millimeters.
33,
That was
yeah.
the longest. So that's what they were meant for, just to have your spring sitting in the correct position, indeed. So indeed, if you're using them with the wrong length, you might end up with a worse performance or having to correct your preload on the damper itself to sort of have it sitting in the right position.
Yeah.
But indeed, they are machined, and also they look nice. I mean, that's.
I was going to say that for me, it's mostly about having something that looks nice and is precise and accurate. That's kind of what it all boils down to for me.
Yeah.
They're just they're essentially a part that adds a bit of precision and looks nice, and they're cheap enough that they're worth a shot, really.
You might lose a gram here or there as well in weight.
Yeah, but
depending
it's one
on what you're replacing.
It's one of those things that there's situations where that can help or hinder. So get them, and maybe if something doesn't feel right, swap them around, put the other ones back on. It's probably not going to be the spring retainers that makes much difference, assuming they fit and they're not being rammed in and binding up or anything like that because you've got the wrong size ball cups on the end. His final question, which is a very good one, and the reason you might have heard me just rustling, is he's asked which is the best metric tool set. I'm assuming for RC, and for me, it's the old school Overdose tool set, which obviously sounds a bit fanboy-like to some people, but I've been using these sets, not this set, this is my second set, but the set that's in my pit bag I've been using since they launched. I want to say in 2014, somewhere around then. It was around the same time that the titanium springs first came out, and I've been using them exclusively. I've never damaged anything, I've never broken a tip, and the tips on these are super sharp, and while to some people that's not a big deal, if you need to undo a slightly rounded screw head, having something like this will get it off. The amount of times when I ran Soul RC that we had a customer that had stripped a screw or rounded a screw head or a grub screw and couldn't get it off with their tools and was just making it worse, and Matt or I would just grab our Overdose tool sets and pop them free, because they're super precise, super sharp, and still, even after all these years, I'm still on the original tips and they're just as good. I've been using, like I say, I've now got two sets. I've got one in my pit bag and one that stays at home with me, and you'll see also I run different lengths, purely to they're staggered, so the ones in my pit bag have the opposite lengths to these, so if I need a short 1.5 mil, I've got one to hand and haven't got to change the length. And yeah, to me they're the ultimate. There are plenty of other good tools. Hoodie tools are good, TRF tools are good, but these are just a little bit better, and like I say, they've never failed me. The only thing that I would say about them is they only have, you get a 1.5, a 2 mil, a 2 mil ball head, and then a 5.5 and a 7 mil socket, which is all you need really, but it means I also have to have another flathead with me and some Phillips drivers and stuff like that. But for me it's fine because these are so good, but they're still readily available in a couple of places. They've officially been discontinued for a very long time, but they were quite expensive. And in fact, the only reason I bought a second set was because, in terms of them, it's a lot of money to spend on a second set of needless tools. Was because I was at the RCDC event in Nagoya, and Overdose had a very special 50% off discount on them as a very impressive event sale. So I couldn't really say no to a half-price tool set.
But yeah, like you say, they might be a bit harder to find, and also on the expensive side.
Yes, for sure.
Personally, I've been using Hero Psycho tools.
Yep.
I had a deal with them years ago. Got those tools, and just like you, I'm still on the same set of tips. They haven't really worn out. They haven't broken anything, and they were great. They were relatively cheap. I think they were about 10-15 euros for, no, I think less than 10 euros for one tool, basically. So that was a very nice option too. Again, I don't know if those are available anymore, but yeah, the hoodie sets, they're great. There's a few more, but definitely do not go for the really cheap stuff.
No, I mean, I started out, Richie in chat is saying that he's been using EDS tools for 15 plus years and not had a problem. I started out with the red EDS tools right at the start. They were fine. They're not in the same league as the Overdose or some of the other tools I have seen, but they're very good for the money. And also at Soul RC, the most popular tools we'd sell would be the Aeromax purple sets, which were, again, they were maybe not quite as good as EDS, but they were pretty good. They were solid, entry level kits that were relatively cheap for what you were getting. And then the Aeromax Honeycomb Set, I also have a mostly full set of, which I had from before the Overdose tools came out, and they were very good. I did break a 1.5 mil tip on one of those, but I was doing something a bit stupid with it, so maybe it was my own fault. But I think generally, as long as you buy something from a reputable company that's known, and especially if they're known for making tools, even if it's setup tools like Aeromax, they're pretty good, solid tools. They're not gonna break too early. But the unnamed Chinese stuff doesn't last. The very first set of tools I had was actually just a random Amazon special RC tool set with the right sizes in, and I think I used, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes worth total, and they were all stripped, all crap, and went in the bin. And they all got replaced with the EDS set within my first week or so of having them.
Yeah, I also had those as well. And not only do they strip the tips on the screwdrivers, but also
they
for
cause you
stripping the
headaches.
screws.
Yes.
Oh man, so many times I've had screws stuck in the bottom deck where you just cannot get it out anymore. It's a total pain.
It's one of those things. I think when you're first starting out, it seems a bit extravagant to spend some money on tools, and it probably is. But when you're into the hobby and you know you're not leaving, having a half decent set of tools, EDS, Aeromax, something like that, they're good enough for 99% of people, and they should last you long enough. And also, they all do replacement tips should you have a problem, so they're easy to get hold of. It just makes your life a lot easier because it means you don't strip screws, which, as stupid as it sounds, shouldn't be a luxury. If you've got a decent tool set, you don't damage you don't damage screws, and you can just take a part off and put it back on when you need to. But also, it means you're very familiar with your tools, and you get to know you learn the muscle memory of how tight to do things up, which again sounds a bit over the top when you're first starting out, but when you need to not damage a part by over tightening it, particularly on a plastic chassis or gearbox or something like that, it's really good to be able to know what tight feels like, because especially on some of the super light, cheaper tools, you can end up over tightening things without even knowing you're doing it. I mean, that's the weird thing with the overdose tools. They're ridiculously heavy, which it's not of any benefit. But now the muscle memory is there, and I can use any overdose tools and get things exactly right first time.
Plus, those come with the ball tip 2mm, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a perk over a lot of other brands.
It is. I would recommend always having a ball tip, but don't use the ball tip unless you need to use it, because you are more likely to strip a screw if you're using a ball tip when you don't have to. And also, they have a tendency to not stay as sharp for as long because of the nature of the way you use them. So you want to minimize the use on the ball tip until you actually need it. So if you can get straight access to it, just use a standard 2mm.
But it can definitely save you some time with when you have to make a quick repair or something on the side of the track.
Yes.
And it saves you taking the whole car apart to get to this one difficult screw.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you've just got to get behind something even, or I don't know. It's saved me on numerous occasions for sure. But yeah. What are we moving on to, Tijs? We're going to go.
What we've been busy with, I guess.
Yeah.
Back to our usual program, I would say.
So this is this is what's Tijs been busy with, because once again I haven't, unfortunately, with decorating here, so that's taking priorities.
Yeah, same for me. I've also only had one day to work on my my body shell so far, but at least I got some progress, so that's always good.
Yeah. So what am I looking at here?
These updates. So these are more 3D printed bits for my crown body shell, because that's what we're talking about, the hyperdrive replica.
Yep, that we've been showing for the last 3 weeks, I think.
Something like that, yeah. That's why I like doing these updates on the podcast, because I'm sort of forced to make progress with the body shell. Now I don't get stuck, so that's good. So what I've made are these quick release panel holders, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Sort of like the replacements for a lot of bonnet pins and arrow catches and whatnot.
Push button latches.
Yeah, and these are spread out all across the hyperdrive crown of Taniguchi. So of course I had to make them as well. So I printed these out, spray painted them in gloss black, some primer first, obviously. So I'm gonna be adding these to the I think to the bonnet, to the trunk, a few other places.
So how have you designed this then? Are you going to cut one off with a blade and just stick it on, or is there something underneath that attaches it, or are you just literally going to slice them off?
No, so they're raised, like I've printed a little platform underneath, so I could sprue them all together. But they're actually raised quite a bit from that little platform.
Okay.
So they have a 1mm thick sort of pin underneath.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna slice them off right above the little platform. So I have a bit of a pin sticking out, so I can drill a little hole in the body shell and then just glue them in.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least that's the plan. So let's see how well it will go.
Have you gone to the trouble of measuring screenshots and doing all that kind of stuff to get the sizing right, or have you just guessed?
It's sort of a guess. I googled a set of these, just some generic brand of these quick release latches, and they actually had all of the sizes there on the
Okay.
website. So I just took those and divided by 10, and there you go.
Perfect.
So they actually look pretty scale
Yeah.
in terms of the size. I can always redo them if I don't like them, but so far they seem all right. So
Yeah, man. And what do we got here?
yeah, more details. So I've been painting with my new chrome paint. We talked about it last week. So I paint the light buckets and the grill. So the crown comes with an optional grill. So I've masked off these little chrome strips, painted the rest black. But yeah, I need to put some detail in the buckets for sure, especially the rear ones because they're
Yeah.
completely flat. So I think I'm going for some wrap up lens decals,
Yeah.
some transparent red paint, maybe add something in here that makes it look right. I mean, the good thing is that Taniguchi's crown has stock rear lights,
Yeah.
so you don't have any LEDs or anything fancy going on. It just needs to illuminate red,
Yeah.
and that's it. So that will make it easier. But yeah.
That's cool. And then we've also got these.
Yeah, so last week I showed the render for my 3D printed modular cage pieces, the roll cage pieces. So these came in. I think I got them yesterday. Yeah, so they were finished over the weekend. Got them yesterday from work, and they look amazing. So the design worked out, but I tried to fit them up to the body shell, and if you hold them in the correct place, they look great. So the sizing is good, but I've made these mounting tabs on the bottom and the top, and they're way off.
Oh,
So I'm
really?
gonna I'm gonna have to redesign them a bit, but yeah, it's gotten pretty close. Yeah, so as you can see, the overall look is correct. The diameter of the tube is good. The size of the gusset is good. Now I just need to sort of make them a bit better fitting.
Yeah.
That's
Is that just a case of tweaking the angles on those plates, or is it a bit
yeah,
more
just
complicated?
making the tabs a little bit bigger, I think, because
Okay.
they're a bit too far off from the body shell.
Oh, I see.
The way I'm holding it, it's sort of floating in the middle of the body shell, so
Ah,
needs a bit more
I
space.
see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I set it down like this, you see that it's all the way at the top of the window instead
Yeah.
of being in the middle where it should be. So it needs a bit of adjustment, but the idea actually works. So
Yeah.
the modular cage pieces, it's pretty good. And this one's very specific, but if you have something a bit more generic, this could definitely work.
Yeah. And didn't take you too long to get them prototyped, and small tweak, and you should be there, I guess.
Yeah, I'm designing most of these things with a software called Tinkercad,
Okay.
which is the absolute basic of the basis of 3D modeling.
Yeah.
It's free, it's in your browser, so everyone can do it. It's very limited, but for simple pieces like this, it still works just fine.
Yeah.
I actually discovered a tube bender or a rod bender feature in there, so now I can make cages.
Nice.
Yeah, I thought I knew everything about it, but there's more.
So, what's your hopes for the next week? How far do you think you're going to get? Is it going to be just tweaking these?
No clue. I kind of want to have painting done.
Yeah.
So I still have some what are they called? Like these window visors on the sides.
Yeah.
That I need to paint with smoke. It needs
like the window
window
deflectors.
trim, few more logos painted on it. So I hope I have that done.
Cool.
So then it's really just details that need to be added, which is going to be a lot of 3D printing as well.
Yeah.
I'm not done yet with the 3D design.
Cool. Well, I guess that's progress for this week. I promise I will get to RC stuff at some point soon, but unfortunately I have a baby on the way, so other things have to happen first.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe the tracks will open at sometime soon.
I'm
So
crossing
then
my
there will
fingers
be,
for inside the next few weeks. And
yeah, I booked my spots for the
of
reopening
course.
of Tory Circuit.
So next weekend? If I remember right?
It's what is it, the 6th of June?
Yeah.
I think that's next weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect,
So
man. So what?
I'm looking forward to that.
Are you there on a Sunday or
Saturday?
Oh, you got you got in.
I was a bit bummed that it was all full, but fortunately for me, unfortunately for all the Belgian drivers, they're still stuck till the 8th of June, so just after the event. So they unfortunately had to cancel, but
so you get to sneak in.
That means there's a spot open for me. That's lucky for me.
Also, following on from last week, we've got another announcement from MST.
Yes,
last week we covered the FMX KMW, well, they've just released or announced a new version, which is another FMX, which is the low center of gravity, the LCG. So they've basically dropped the motor position by 5 mil, if I remember right.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's
And then also a completely new upper deck as well.
yes,
right?
yeah, which I guess just ties it all together and changes the flex a bit. But yeah, it's kind of cool to see, but it seems very strange the timing when you announce one version that's one way and then immediately an alternate version of the same chassis. Like, surely the KMW should just have this already on. But yeah, there we go. It's a new motor mount, which is kind of good because one of the things I think people struggled with on some of the FMX and FXX stuff is meshing motors and gears and things like that. I think the FMX2 probably fixed that, but this looks very simple. But yeah, 5 mil lower center of gravity. It's always a good thing to have. Just an unusual way of doing things, I think, with the launches.
Especially considering that the KMW is the high-end version.
Yes, exactly. That now has an. I'm wondering if it has an upgrade available or whether it won't just fit straight on. I assume it would. This is obviously just renderings as well, so I don't think they announced when this is coming, but it does say 2020. So you're assuming it's going to come probably August time. MST tend to like to release a chassis in August. That's my guess. That's not based on any information. It's pure guess, pure speculation.
Looking at the renders, this might be sort of in between the FXX 2.0 and the KMW, because this does come with the carbon fiber decks.
This looks a lot like the old Pro spec that they used to do, which was somewhere in the middle of the entry level and the high end, and had some of the upgrades. Like, it also looks like it's got aluminium dampers. And so, yeah, in theory, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see for some more information. They might have also just been testing the water to see what people thought of this. But it'd be really cool, I think, if this came on the KMW, because I think if a full option chassis had 5 mil lower center of gravity, it's going to perform significantly better with the added weight. So it's a win-win for me if they could get it out. But obviously planning 2 separate launches. And we'll have to see if this can be mounted. I can't see any reason why it wouldn't. Surely the gearbox and stuff is all the same. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And hopefully they'll announce some pricing and stuff soon. Because this looks like a really nice level in terms of spec. So you haven't got the plastic parts, you can just go straight in with the carbon. But then this could also just be a maybe the final spec is different to the rendering. Although it doesn't say it's an FMX2 LCG, it just says FMX2 LCG. So also the S version. So it doesn't say it's a base spec. So we'll have to see. Maybe there's a third one coming. But yeah,
maybe they took some inspiration from Yokomo and have multiple versions available of the same chassis.
Yes, just to make it confusing for people.
Yeah.
We also have a very quick announcement from Accuvance, who announced this week that they're going to bring, or that we already knew, they're bringing out the high torque rotor for the Fledge motor. And they've announced it. It's available to order now for dealers. And it should be very good. It's 5,000 yen, so that's like 40 something euros. So similar price to the older stuff. But I'm very much looking forward to trying this because I did very much like the high torque rotors in the Agile and in the Overdose version 3 motors. So I like a high torque rotor, particularly on a low grip surface. I'm a big fan of it, so I'm very much looking forward to getting one of these. But in terms of availability from dealers, it's probably in the coming week or two as stuff's getting shipped out. But there is a bit of a problem with getting things shipped from Japan at the moment, as they are sort of hitting the peak of the coronavirus lockdown stuff. So EMS, for example, is no longer shipping outside of Japan to a lot of countries. So a lot of dealers might wait until after things settle down to make it a bit more affordable, because some of the shipping costs from Japan can be quite crazy, as I'm sure Tijs knows.
I know all about it, yes. Actually, all of the surface stuff is still going, so luckily some of my packages have been shipped out, but indeed EMS was not available. Some good news came today, I think, that at least Tokyo is sort of easing on their coronavirus measures. So maybe that means that the rest of the country will follow soon as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just speculation at the moment. So let's see how it plays out.
Speaking of Tokyo, I'm just going to slip a bit of news in that we haven't really prepared anything for. I haven't got any photos or anything, but I read today that a new shift circuit is opening.
Oh, really?
It's
That's
not
good news.
it's not called Shift, and the reason I haven't done it as a proper news article is because I'm waiting for some information to come to me. But it's opening in the same location as Shift, and Sabaya, who was the owner of Shift, is mentioned that he is. What was the wording he used? He is a consultant, I think was the wording he used, and he'll be managing it. So I think he's running the track, but it's not his track. Maybe I could be wrong. Again, I'm going on translated stuff from Google, and trying to piece together the weird translations. But it's
going to be in the same location then.
It's in the same shop, but there's new P-tile down just for the track. So it's gone from white P-tile to black P-tile.
Okay, interesting.
Which I think will be the same stuff that is used at Vega and the same stuff that is used at Waru. And it's quite popular tiles, although everybody manages it differently. But it means I think I know what the surface will feel like because I've driven on a very similar surface before. But it's very cool. It's super cool to see another track opening because it's a great location. It's a great track with a great user base. Like all the drivers that run at Shift all of the time are very high skill, as we mentioned when we talked about tracks. So it's very cool that there's something open in the same area to keep those guys running and to keep the style running. I hope that everyone carries on as they were essentially. The layout looks interesting. It's on Sabaya's Amaba blog if you want to check it out. It's at the moment I think it's just called the Tokyo E-Drift Circuit or something. But yeah, it's very cool. Anyway, I thought I'd sneak that in there because it just came to me.
So I saw a question coming by in the chat about the Accuvance rotors.
Yes.
So they're asking if the Accuvance rotors are always using Delrin bushings instead of bronze that you see a lot of.
In all honesty, I don't know about the Fledge because I haven't taken mine apart. But the Agile used bronze, and all of the ones before that. But there was quite a few people having problems with the Agile motors. Usually, once they'd taken them apart and they were stripping, or the thickness of the bushes was getting a lot smaller very fast. So this may be another option, or this could also just be a spacing thing. But I actually saw this and I was quite tempted to strip a motor apart in the coming days just to see, because I had never seen that before. But it'll be very interesting if they are. But I do know that Accuvance are very good at improving their product. So this, if they have switched to this, there must be a good benefit, other than just being lightweight and non-conductive. But
anyway, it's a very good observation.
Yes, it is. Good spot. I looked at it a few times before I spotted that. I said I looked at it a few times before I spotted that. We've also had a question from Tyler saying, have we had any photos of bodies and stuff sent in to us? I got some today, but a bit late for today's show. But I haven't had too many lately, unfortunately. So if you have some, fire them in. We can feature them next week.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of sort of stopped doing that segment of the podcast, but it doesn't mean we're still into it.
So yeah, and to be honest, the main reason we kind of stopped is because there wasn't many coming in, and it was mostly very similar stuff to what we'd already shown.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we've got one last new item, which is a very late addition today.
Yes, so this is from EasyMate. So we talked about some of the EasyMate stuff last week, the chassis skins, but they're also gonna come out with a Yokomo YD2 conversion, carbon fiber decks, and so basically this will fit the YD2 SNE platform. Yep. And the cool thing about this particular conversion kit is that it both features a regular 260mm wheelbase, but also the long 275mm wheelbase, with the same chassis deck. So you can move the bulkhead and suspension mounts forward, and it sort of stretches the wheelbase, and you can switch really easily between 275 and 260.
That's cool.
especially with the YD2 not really having an upper deck in a lot of the different versions of the YD2. So you just have the bottom deck.
Yeah.
I think we also have a video as well.
Yes, we do. Leave run it, loop it.
Yeah,
It looks very cool. It's very nice matte carbon as well.
Yeah, the matte carbon is 2.5 mil thick. It's basically made to flex a little bit of the chassis. And in this video, I think you can also see that there will be some side rails, or at least that's the plan.
Yeah.
Which might be from another material. So we have to wait and see until the actual version comes out. I didn't get any information on the release date or the price.
Okay.
Because it's still a work in progress, but I think the hopes are that it's finished by the end of next month, roughly around this time. And I would say keep an eye on the internet page if you're interested in this conversion kit.
Yeah, makes sense. And fingers crossed we'll get some information soon. I think if we see anything in the next week or two, we'll try and update everyone next week. Just throw it out there. And follow Easy Made on Facebook because they're pretty good at posting stuff. Okay. I guess that's us done for the news for this week at least.
Yeah, we haven't really announced the main topic for today yet.
No.
Maybe it's good to do that in advance so people can
Probably.
get their opinions and suggestions and questions in the live chat. But basically, we want to talk about the top 3 upgrades to do to your chassis. So what both James and I think are the first 3 upgrades or the best 3 upgrades to get for your chassis.
Yeah, for me, I was thinking more in terms of like bang for buck. So sort of
Same.
Not necessarily the first, but probably the most effective and the biggest change that you'll feel on your chassis if you go for these options. When I was thinking about it, I've sort of assumed fairly entry level chassis, but not necessarily beginner drivers, but also something that a beginner would benefit from as well. And if it was a beginner, it's something they're going to benefit with over the course of the life of the chassis, not just a quick hit. It's definitely sort of investment items rather than cheap options.
Yeah. For me, it's the same. I also went for the 3 things that at least made the most impact for myself. But it would probably be one of the first 3 that I would buy for any chassis that I'm going to build, if I'm going to get anything new, unless, of course, it's already included.
Yes.
Which is the case sometimes.
Yeah, and there's a sort of prerequisite with this, which is sometimes when you buy options or option parts, they add so many choices to your settings that it can make things quite confusing, particularly if you're going cross-brand. So you're not buying the knuckles that were designed with your chassis in mind, they're just knuckles that are available. If you think back to the MST AKM knuckles, they had 9 holes on the top, 9 holes on the bottom, and I think it was 12 options for the steering position, which meant they were great because they'd work with everything, but it meant you could get a bit lost trying to find the basic starting positions. But yeah, so it's one of those things. You don't necessarily need all the options, but also at the same time, you should always consider sometimes you get option parts that are released that don't offer any options, any choices over the standard part. They're just made of aluminium, which sometimes is a half decent idea, and sometimes it's a bit restrictive. But yeah, so I guess we should probably just start with our number 1, which for me and you is dampers.
Yes, yeah, we're on the same level, and I think for me this is also the most important. So it's definitely number 1 on my list.
Yeah.
I think if no good dampers or shocks or whatever you want to call it are included with the chassis, that's definitely the first thing I would buy.
Yeah, or also if you've bought a used chassis and it comes with poorly maintained dampers, you should immediately if you had a new chassis that the dampers were so bad that they didn't move freely, or that you felt they felt gritty or not smooth or leaking or anything like that, I personally wouldn't even run the chassis on those dampers initially. I would get it fixed before you run it, because you're not going to get a good representation of what the chassis is about. You're probably not going to fall in love with your new chassis, and you're going to get frustrated because it might not drive that well. So it's the reason we did a damper basics video recently. It's one of those things that it's so critical to the performance of the chassis that it's well worth just taking the time to get it fixed initially. But having a good set of dampers can be can completely transform a chassis, and especially when they're built well with advice from advanced drivers or experienced drivers, you can end up with a chassis that's a joy to drive. And anything that's not quite built so well can just be a frustration, particularly if it's not been done by somebody with much experience. It's not to say that somebody with no experience can't build good dampers, but it just there's a bit of skill involved and a bit of experience required to know the pitfalls, which is why we shared our video or the live stream recently, purely to point some of those out. But to go with the dampers, we've also sort of tacked onto that springs, because you really need to match your springs and dampers together. And it might be that if you change from very basic plastic dampers to high quality or fancy dampers, if you were to go as far as overdose HG dampers or something like that, the stock springs might work that came with the chassis. They might not, particularly if you were to add some other upgrades and add a lot of weight to the chassis. So it's one of those things you just have to keep an eye out. If you have half decent dampers and you're not quite sure on why the car's not driving that well, I would just get a basic set of springs from MST or RevD or Yokomo or Overdose, or any of the TNs or top line springs. They're not that expensive, and they will help you decide if the springs need to be changed. Sometimes you'll buy a set of springs and end up going back to what you were already using, but it will save you a lot of time trying to tune the car because you'll have immediately discounted springs as an option. And you can always put them in your pit bag and use them at the next track, or further down the line at somewhere else. So it's well worth having. I mean, I've banged on about it a lot on this live stream, but I end up taking many sets of springs with me to most tracks, and I don't use many of them because but they're there just in case I need them or somebody else needs them. I regularly end up lending springs to other people, particularly when we're on a surface they're not familiar with, so when we go to cookies or something like that, because it's very easy to instantly feel whether the springs are worth changing once you've changed them.
Yeah, and also having a good set of dampers, no matter which brand or which particular set, usually it adds a bunch of different tuning options too. So indeed the springs, but also like we talked about in our damper video, pistons, different O-rings, different bladders, maybe some options in terms of rebound. There's maybe adjustability in terms of length of the damper. So just indeed, bang for buck, the dampers are such a good option to have. I think what are the overdose, the HGs, because those are, I think, the fanciest dampers, let me call it like that.
Yeah.
That are available right now. I think those are what are they, like about 120 or 160 euros?
Yeah, more like 160.
Yeah, so that's, I mean,
It's
essentially
essentially it's essentially 3 sets of basic aluminium dampers, or maybe 2.5 sets depending on pricing, and for some people they won't know the difference or feel the difference, and for other people it's so worth the money that there's no question for it. I mean, it's funny because I was about to say all I run is Overdose HG dampers, and that's very true on my main chassis, but I've got 2 chassis with me here just in case I needed to reference anything, and one has some TRF dampers with some fancy RC96 dress-up parts, and one has the Axon 16-hole pistons in their dampers, purely because I put them on my Vacula 2 purely to test them on carpet, because I tested them on P-tile and tested them on concrete and low grip surfaces, but I wanted to try them on carpet. So the last time I ran this, which you can tell is not for a while since I've stripped some parts off it, but normally I just run the Overdose HE dampers version 2s because to me they're the best and they work perfectly, and nothing even comes close in terms of quality and precision, in my honest opinion. They are very expensive.
Even if you then compare the price to some of the other upgrades, I think it really adds a lot of tuning options and a lot of performance to your chassis.
Yeah.
I mean, I cannot really think of anything else except for maybe the 1 or 2 other things we're going to have in this list that are around a similar price that add so much performance and options.
Yeah, and also the other thing that I'll say there is I often see people that balk at the price of a set of Overdose HG dampers, but they spend the same amount of money on a bumper plate, on a servo mount, on maybe 3 or 4 other things that don't really add that much to the chassis, and then later down the line they end up buying better dampers anyway. And inevitably most people end up using HGs because nothing else has been able to match them. There's a question just coming to chat. Any tips on how to fit damper guides without distorting the hull, especially on HG shocks? Yes, the tip I would give you is to use, depending on which dampers, if you can get a 5.5mm socket wrench in there and push it down flat against the table. So if you've got it on the table like this, the cup is there, and you just push perfectly straight down, and you end up they just snap into place. I think we mentioned in our damper basics video that the guides on almost all dampers will click into place or snap into place, and if they don't, you're stretching them. It should be like a quick in. If there's no sound, you probably stretched them into place and distorted them. But yeah, literally just pushing them down. If you can't get 5.5mm in there, which you can't on most dampers, using something like a 3 or a bigger hex wrench, or something that's basically not going to poke through the hole or damage the hole, something that covers it entirely, and it ideally isn't sharp. So sometimes I'll use I've used body posts before and things like that, because they don't require a lot of force, but the key is just get it to go in perfectly straight, and then just push down. But that, like, I don't recommend you do it in your hand, because it's got to be straight. So ideally on a flat pit board or something like that, that's the best way to do it. I've also used the tools that come with standard kits and things like that before, or parts of the plastic sprues off things, just something that will go in and not damage the materials. It's not so much the aluminium lower damper cap that's the problem, it's the guide themselves, because there's nothing worse than trying to take your time to do something right and then you damage the part anyway. So yeah.
Some of the rebuild kits for team associated dampers, especially some of the older ones, they come with a specific tool for just this, to
Okay.
put the guides into place. And basically it's just a long plastic cylinder, like a pretty heavy one, with a tip on there that's I think 2.5mm or something.
Well, I was going to say the other,
put the guide on there and just poke it right into the right
the other
place.
thing you can do, but I don't recommend it until you've tested a few times, and don't go too hard too quickly, is you can get the right size driver and slip the guide over it and just poke it through, because there's normally a step like there is on this. I don't know if you can see that, that the shaft gets bigger on the drivers, and normally you can just poke it in, but you've got to be very careful because sometimes that might stretch it, or if you use the wrong size you can scratch it. So yeah, that's not something I'd recommend, but I've done it before when I've been in a bit of a pinch. I guess we should move on to our second choices for upgrades, maybe.
Yes, and I think here we're also sort of on the same level, although I think you've gone a bit more specific.
Yes. Yeah.
But we're both talking about steering related items.
Yes. So
maybe you go first, I would say.
I specifically started with front knuckles, and this is very chassis dependent. So sometimes this doesn't really apply. Some of the chassis come with great front knuckles that are basic, and but they cover all the bases that you need them to do. The reason I added this is because certain chassis won't really unlock, like a GARM version 1 with standard knuckles and standard rack will have limited steering lock unless you do a few little parts and grind down a couple of parts and lock stop and things like that. They work perfectly fine, but if you really want to push the chassis and level up a bit, then you need to tweak it a little bit or upgrade them. But the main reason I say to upgrade them is because things like the Overdose version 2 knuckles offer so many benefits over standard knuckles. In fact, standard knuckles of any manufacturer really, that they are worth the money. And again, they're not, the Overdose version isn't a cheap option, but everything I've ever run them on works great. And it's the same with the MST AKM knuckles, the older ones that are discontinued now. I'm not such a huge fan of the ATK knuckles, although they do work excellently on certain chassis. They're not as universal, whereas the AKM knuckles, because they had so many options in terms of positions of everything, you could make them work on absolutely everything, and many chassis would benefit from putting them on. The version 2 overdose knuckles are very similar because you can adjust the trail, you can adjust the kingpin angle, you can adjust the Ackerman so much that you basically can completely fine tune the steering to get it perfect. I can't remember. I think the Vacula here has. Yes, it does have version 2s on. I couldn't remember if I'd upgraded them. And I'm not going to be able to show you this on this camera because of the focus. But they basically.
I can give it a try, but
yes. So you can adjust the Ackerman on the steering ball joint link. You can adjust the trailing angle with spacers, and then you can adjust the kingpin angle to 4 options. And everything I've put these on is magically amazing. So, and I find with them over the AKMs, they are easier to to find the sweet spot because they generally will work in a. I just vanished. It's gone all blurry. They generally will get you.
It doesn't want to focus anymore.
It will generally get you closer to where you need to be quicker. But yeah, so the AKM knuckles are very good. Some of the wrap-up knuckles are also very good. But when you end up with knuckles that, like I mentioned before, are just aluminium versions of the standard knuckles, I'm not so keen on that. It might be that the standard knuckles are great, and I know people like Dan Chapman really rate the standard RMX knuckles. So when Racing brought out some aluminium knuckles that, to the best of my knowledge, are basically aluminium versions of the standard plastic ones, that might work great. But it also means you don't have options should you want to change things, or if you want to put them on something else later down the line. Whereas for me, having a good set of knuckles that you can just try something or get a chassis up and running like this, the anchor that I've got has the old version 1's knuckles on from my car. So when I went to version 2's, I had to put them in my pit box and they were there as spare, and that means I've got knuckles for a chassis that I'm put together, and I haven't got to go out and buy something there and then, or find something. But yours is a bit more general in terms of steering, I think.
Yes.
So I guess that also includes knuckles.
It definitely also includes knuckles, but it's very chassis specific indeed. And I think you really have to look at what is the major letdown in terms of the steering. So either it's the steering rack or wipers or whatever system your chassis has, or the knuckles, or both. In terms, for example, for myself with the old RMX, not the RMX 2.0, but the old one, the steering rack was all right. The curved steering rack that was in it, that was not really a big deal. The knuckles, however, that was a really big letdown. They were very old, they were outdated. I put the AKMs on at some point, they were great. So then that would be my number 2 upgrade. For the Galm that I have now, it was both. It was definitely the steering and the knuckles, but I started out with the steering, the slide rack, because the old plastic one, it flexes, and it didn't have the adjustability that I needed, and it was the main blocker to get the steering angle that I needed.
And which one did you go to? You went to the curved rack, was it?
Yeah, the curved rack, the first one, not the new one that came out recently. And then after that, I went for the knuckles because I did have the steering angle, but not the correct Ackerman. I didn't have the adjustability, so then I went to the knuckles.
Yeah, and then that sort of filled in the gaps and made everything work together.
Exactly, that just fine-tuned it to what I needed. So for me, they sort of go hand in hand, and I would say steering is the number 2. No matter what specific upgrade you need to get either the angle or the Ackerman or both correct for your tuning, for your setup. So that's my number 2.
Yeah, well, linking to that, and as we said, I was quite specific. So my number 3 is steering rack, for all of the reasons that Tijs just mentioned. But it also, there's something also to be said about upgrading to an aluminium steering rack or an aluminium and carbon steering rack over a plastic one because of the rigidity and accuracy that you get. Because the thing to remember with the steering rack is that the movements in your rack are amplified on the wheels. Generally, there's lever ratios involved to utilize the torque of the servo. So when your steering rack is wobbling away, your wheels will wobble away. And if that wobbling is because of poor maintenance or something like that, it's going to be the same whatever. But if it's just because the rack is made of plastic and tolerances are a bit big to make it easy and not break or flex, it just means that things move around that you don't want to move around. And There might also be delays with your inputs, which might cause problems, and they're not going to be massive problems. But when you go from an all plastic rack to a tight tolerance aluminium rack, generally the confidence with the front end of the car just increases massively. And when you've got the confidence in the front end of your car, that's when you can really pitch it in and attack things harder and faster, and also be more precise when you're chasing somebody. If your front end is super precise, it means you can be sure that only the movements you intend to do are going to be what you end up with on the track. So you're not going to bump people or crash or do anything like that. And once you've had that, it's very difficult to go back. So it's often one of those things that when I start out with a plastic chassis, when something new launches, I can't wait for the aluminium steering to come out, because it's something that's very noticeable for me. And it's the reason that I like my chassis to be very front end controlled. So I like the steering to be very planted and solid, and to know that my input is going to be precise and accurate and fast, in terms of I don't want to delay and things like that. So for me, racks, the rack is number 3, but Tijs was a bit less specific than me.
Yes.
He gets a free choice. He gets an extra pick.
Yes. I mean, it's all chassis dependent, of course.
Yeah.
So that's why I was not so specific. But for my number 3 on the list, it was quite difficult to make a choice, because there, like, after dampers, after steering, there's so much left that still makes quite a big impact. Not as much as the other two.
Yeah.
But I sort of thought maybe suspension mounts, so you have the options of setting toe in and toe
Yeah.
out and stuff. But eventually I went with the differential. I mean, gearing is another one that maybe is interesting, but it's not really that much of an upgrade as it is just
a tune.
Opinion or spur. Unless you're talking about, for example, bevel gears in a gearbox or something like that. But even then, it's a relatively inexpensive upgrade. So for me, it's the differential. I've noticed that it's the one thing that I'm currently really missing on my Gaum, for example, is a ball diff.
Yeah.
Because right now it has a spool, and I know we've talked about the difference between a spool versus a ball diff versus a gear diff on last week's episode. So let's not go into it too deep, but definitely the differential. Just to have the options, for example, because usually whatever chassis you buy, it comes with one particular type of diff.
Yeah.
Either it's a ball diff or a spool. I think gear diff is not really very common for drift chassis, at least not as a standard.
No.
But just to have the option to either have a spool or a ball diff, just to switch for different tracks, for different setups.
And even just in terms of having a diff, even if you don't have a spool as well, it just being able to tune that diff, to tighten it or loosen it, to find the traction. It makes a huge difference, and it's definitely it was definitely high on my list of options. But it's very hard when you think of lists like this, and you're trying to rank something in terms of importance. Very difficult to think chassis wide, not just something about a Gaum or a YD2 or an Aeromax. Because one of the things I would always recommend on a Gaum would be rear knuckles, because the overdose rear knuckles allow you to tune. They allow you to tune. You've got the rear toe. You've also got the center of gravity, and also gives you more camber options, and also track width options and things like that. So they open and unlock a whole bunch of options for you. But when you open that up to other chassis, yes, those knuckles will fit, but other chassis might have other flaws that need rectifying or sorting. So a diff is a really good option. Another thing that Tijs mentioned would be adjustable toe straps, because it depends on the chassis and what the settings are. Certain chassis, particularly older chassis, they need rear toe adjusting, whereas more recent chassis, that's kind of okay out the box. And it always depends on surface. It depends on driver ability. Something like a Gaum is designed so that a beginner can buy a Gaum and get into the hobby and enjoy themselves. So that means it has to be easy to drive, it has to be easy to build, it has to be easy to maintain. But then the same chassis also has to be able to win the World Championships. So it needs a huge range of options available in terms of tuning and in terms of just choosing the physical options on the chassis. So it can be a bit overwhelming to try and put together a list and try and make it so that it covers everything, and inevitably certain things get forgotten about. But a beginner doesn't have the same requirements as an advanced driver. The things we've brought up, all three of both of our lists, they will benefit anyone of any skill level. If you
that's the main reason why I put the diff in third place, because usually, if it's set up correctly, maybe not tuned to perfection, but at least it's working. It's something that you'd sort of drop in and you notice the effect.
yeah
While as knuckles, toe in, it takes a lot of tuning. Trying some different settings,
and
going
those
from one extreme to
settings
another to feel the difference.
and those
While with the
settings
differential,
can be very dependent on other settings too. So you could
Mm,
change the rear toe, but if your Ackerman's not right, it's not going to make too much of a difference. So
yeah.
that's the other thing to always consider.
Plus the differential, it plays into your throttle control, because you
Yes.
have more control over the rear traction of the car. So it doesn't have too much to do with setting up or tuning your chassis, more than practicing, learning technique, and feeling the benefits of having good technique. So that's why I put it in the list pretty high, because I think it's a very rewarding upgrade to put in.
Yeah, and it
If you
benefits
notice the
everyone.
difference, yeah, exactly that too.
A beginner that fits a ball diff and maybe gets some help to get it set to the right tightness will find it easier to drive their car, and a super high level driver will be able to push harder because they've probably got more traction and find it easier to find the grip. There are exceptions where some people prefer the feeling of a spool and that kind of thing, but the short story is that most people will get better if you give them a ball diff or a gear diff that's correctly set up for the track they're on. Obviously, having a ball diff that's way too loose or way too tight might be a hindrance, but that's why anyone who's not got the experience with diffs should just ask for help, and somebody with the experience should always help. It's one of the things that I can remember doing almost the most at Soul RC was checking somebody's diff just to see if it was tight enough or too loose or whatever. And you only need to help somebody 2 or 3 times, and then they start to get a feel for where it needs to be, because it is a feeling thing rather than an actual spec thing. And I don't have it to hand, but one of the tools I bought was the Aeromax diff checker, and there's other brands that are now doing the same thing, and they're okay, but they're not that repeatable. From my experience, you can leave them running and the value changes when it has no resistance. So it's very hard to repeat the setting. If you have a diff that works well on the track and you're doing some maintenance and you strip it down and put it back together, it's very hard to get it back to the exact same point as before. That takes some experience. That takes a lot of time to sort of perfect that muscle memory and get yourself just always on the same page of where it needs to be, and also to recognize the feeling of the grip and know whether that needs to go tighter or lower, which is why, again, calling out to more experienced drivers should always help less experienced drivers, because everyone will get there eventually, but nobody just works that out easily on their own quickly. That takes some time.
The diff checker you mentioned, that's one of the digital ones, or not?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't really seen many of them anymore, but there used to be these simple sort of like U-shaped tools
Yeah.
that you could put your diff in, so it holds the two outdrives in place, and then all you have to do is just by hand try to spin the pulley.
Yeah.
I find those are super helpful if you have something like that, just to get started, just to make sure your diff is not too loose.
That's
I
my
mean, too
version.
tight, you're gonna, yeah, if it's
Yeah.
easier if you
Oh,
can
for
hold it
sure.
in one hand
For
and
sure.
just play around with it.
But that's I
Yeah,
do the same thing with 2 drivers.
yeah,
But
yeah, that works.
on something
Yeah,
like an overdose ball diff, you have to pop the sleeves off to be able to do that. But it works.
yeah.
The Aeromax diff checker thing, like I say, if it was 25% of the price, yeah, it's probably worth having. But I think for what it is, it's way too expensive and isn't quite good enough. I think it's Sky RC have just brought out a version. I can't remember. I remember seeing one a week or so ago, but I forget the brand of who's announced it. But it might be worth looking at. But I think it's not many people would benefit from that, and I think there's better ways to spend your money for sure.
At the very least, it's a very high end thing.
Yeah.
It all comes down to the feeling anyway. It doesn't really matter what numbers are attached to that. specific setting. As long as it feels right, it's good. And I think
And
the
it's well
main thing is
maintained
that
as well.
I think the main thing is that if your diff is not too loose or too tight, because that's something you very easily do when you're not
Yeah.
that experienced with the ball diff.
Yeah, and especially if somebody has an issue where maybe when they assembled the kit, they didn't build the ball diff that well, and then maybe it loosens itself or something like that. People tend to then crank it really tight, and in reality, it was just that there wasn't enough grease on there, or there was too much grease on there, or there was a ball missed out, or something like that. And it's generally just one of those things that, with experience, you get the feeling, you understand what it needs to be, and also there's a right and a wrong with diffs, but it's not really that strict. I can sometimes pick up somebody's car and help them out, and I'll tell them that their diff is wrong, but by that I mean it's probably going to cause damage with the way they're driving it. It's one of those things for me. Sometimes I set my diff too loose for how I'd set it for other people's cars, but that's because I've got the experience to know that that's what I want, and I know that the way I drive it, it's probably going to be fine, and also that I'm accepting the responsibility that if it's not, it's my fault. I made a choice. So I've luckily, if I'm going to do something where I'm maybe pushing the limits of safety, I always make sure I've got a spare with me, because you never want to break a diff and then have no options.
Well, then having an extra one is good. At least if you upgrade it to a ball diff, you might have the original one left. So
Yes.
At least you can keep driving.
And that's actually it's a
a
really good point. Is if you do upgrade to a ball diff from a spool or a whatever, whichever option, bring the old one with you. You might never use it, but the one time you break something, you're going to need it, or your buddy might break something and he's going to need it. So it doesn't take up much room in the bag. Just take it with you. There's been so many times over the years that I've pulled out some random part that I didn't think I'd ever need, and I might have been carrying around with me for 2 or 3 years, and all of a sudden either I need it or somebody else needs it. Things like plastic suspension arms. I might not break something, but a guy at the track might break an arm, and magically you've got the right one with you, so you just can get going again.
Yeah, I think that counts for every upgrade, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I've had it last year with the Worlds as well. Last year, the year before, where I stripped all the threads out of my AKM knuckles.
Yes. Yeah.
I was just happy that I had some other ones with me,
Yeah.
so I could quickly get back on track. Even if the settings aren't 100% perfect, at least I could keep driving. So yeah, bring all the originals. Just put it in a little Tupperware box, and even if you don't touch it, at least you have it.
And even if it sits in the boot of your car instead of in your pit bag, it's it's good to have a box of junk essentially with you. That's the stuff that somebody might need. And a lot of tracks actually also have like a what's the word, like a penny jar, but for spares. So when somebody's upgrading their kit and they don't need the front knuckles anymore, or they don't need the diff or whatever it is, they just chuck it in. Somebody can take it if they need it. And all tracks should have that, because it's a really helpful thing, especially when you find screws on the track all the time, which most track owners do. You can just put them in a pot, and when somebody needs an 8mm countersunk screw, there's one in the pot, and they can just take it, and they don't have to buy a pack of 10 or whatever. I spotted just sort of moving on, I spotted a question in chat from Lucas, which is, why is RevD aiming for super light chassis? You need weight for grip. It's not necessarily true that you need weight for grip. On carpet it helps sometimes, but basically less weight means more response, and more response means you can be more precise with inputs. So their current thing is going super light, and the reason they're doing that is because it makes them super fast, and it means that the car is super agile. Having more weight can benefit in certain situations, and I personally have built a super light chassis, and I prefer a bit more weight than that, so I'm actually a better driver when I've got more weight. But you don't need to be super weight. I mean, I think I mentioned on this stream before that in November I went to RCDC and my chassis was about 1800 grams with the body, and I was pretty slow on that carpet, and I managed to get about 350 grams off, and then I was fine in terms of speed. I managed to do okay. But they've picked a strategy to go for lightweight parts, because lightweight parts are relatively easy to make and relatively helpful for a lot of people. And it also means that as we talked about before, they're not putting so many options on some of their upgrade parts. so they don't need quite as many holes making and things like that, so they can sometimes make parts a bit cheaper. But it's just the strategy they've gone for, because Hayato, their sort of star driver, is super into lightweight chassis lately. So it suits them, it suits his style of driving, it suits the other Hayato style of driving too, because he's also into that. But yeah, I think it's something that some manufacturers are looking into a little bit, but no one else is going quite as crazy as Rev D. And I think it's one of those things that on low grip surfaces it makes a bigger difference than it does on carpet. Carpet you can just get away with it with tire grip, but when you're on P-tile or when you're on very slippery asphalt, it's having the ability to make an adjustment to the car sooner gives you big benefits than having to wait for the weight transfer to finish, or wait for the or to not have the car sliding on in a corner when you need to pull into an apex and things like that.
And maybe to specify, you're saying that in some cases it's better to have a bit more weight, but that by that you don't mean adding weight, right?
No.
It just means that
I would almost
you don't go
never
for
add
super
weight.
light options.
The only time you add weight for me is when you're trying to encourage roll, and not necessarily for or almost never in competition situations. That's normally just for fun, weight transfer, realistic looking driving. For me, I stopped adding weight many years ago. Occasionally I've added weight to rear arms and stuff to just get the tires to dig in more, but that's years ago that I've been doing that. Now if I'm adding weight, it's to encourage roll, and that's never a way to be that quick for me.
Yeah, I think right now it's mostly also the weight distribution that people are playing with. So
Yeah.
it's where is your battery, where's your ESC, where's your motor.
Yeah.
You go for high motor, low motor, ESC behind the rear shock tower, things like that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, if I had my gown to hand, I would show that. I've got a rear mounted ESC. The reality is that's not so much about adding weight to the rear, it's just moving the weight. The ESC is what, 150 grams, something like that. And if you were to if you move 150 grams from the center of the chassis and put it behind the chassis, you're adding 150 grams to the back of the chassis, but you're also lightening the front more, so you can basically get more steering response. Or the big thing that the lightweight thing helps with is making the front end lift, because there is less weight over the front, and people generally like to do that because it means their throttle control can determine whether they get more front grip or more rear grip, and that's just by moving the weight forward or back. So yeah, it's just a response thing, mostly the lightweight.
Yeah, and it's really just a weight distribution. Then you're not adding any weight, so the total weight of the chassis will still be the same.
Yeah,
it's just biased more towards the rear usually. And I think it also means you can use some softer springs and stuff in the front without it sagging the deck onto the floor pretty much.
I mean, that's what these axon dampers are all for. They're 16 holes. They're very squeaky actually. They need a rebuild, but they've been sat for many months. But they've got 0 weight oil in, I think 0 and 10 weight, I think, but also the super light HRC springs, and that's a certain style of driving that works in some places and not in others. But even that's a full option Dracula 2 with the lightest oil and the lightest, very light springs, and it's no problem controlling it. So it's just a choice thing. It's a bit of a trend thing, but there is definite benefits behind it. It's not just a random fad. There is some sound decisions made behind it, but it's not something for me. Drifting isn't about racing, so the speed can drop a bit and it's actually more fun and cooler. So I'd rather have the parts that let the chassis work the way I like it. But that said, like I say, for RCDC I removed a load of weight, and I went back to plastic upper arms, I went back to plastic lower arms on the front, and I took off the aluminium bumper brace, and I put the plastic front bulkhead back on, I think, just to lighten the front end essentially, to give it a bit more rear weight bias and to reduce the overall weight of the chassis. But that was mostly a response to driving against people like Hayato, who he was 70, I think he was 73% rear weight bias, something like that, which I went there and I was 59 or something. So when you're in a competition, you know somebody's going to go fast. You need to maybe tweak the chassis to suit it. Although that's not my preferred way of doing things. Sometimes when you're in a competition, you don't do what you want to do. You do what you need to do.
Yeah, yeah. That comes back to the episode we did on drift judging, where you might not drive the exact style you want to do. You drive the style that the judges want to see.
Yes, exactly.
So you're gonna tune your chassis towards driving that particular style. Um,
Yeah.
And also, I think in a lot of competitions there are minimum and maximum weight restrictions.
Yeah, we've actually
So
got a question in chat about that, asking if Japanese P-tail competitions have weight distribution rules.
good timing.
Depending on the level, the low-level competitions, not so much. Maybe basic stuff, but the high-level competitions in Japan use a rear axle weight maximum, and I forget the amount. I want to say it's like 1,400 grams or 1,500 grams, something like that. But basically, it's way more than you're ever going to use if you're having a realistic weight bias. So it's never something I've even had to think about. I just put my car down and I'm never even close to having an issue. But
that's just the maximum then, right?
that's a maximum, and nobody runs close to that. They don't run minimums as far as I know, or at least not any time recently. But again, it's one of those things. If your car can do what the judges ask, it kind of is all that matters. And as long as you're not going to damage the track or other cars or anything like that, or present a danger to anything, it's not so much of a problem. But yeah, so I kind of think that's about all we need to say on that. Which I guess brings us to the end of the show for the week. Bit shorter this week.
I think so. That's not a bad thing. And
No.
I mean, people were asking about bodies and whatnot to be submitted. So I would say anyone who has a cool project going on. I mean, some people are still in lockdown and still staying at home, maybe trying to fill the time building some stuff.
Yes.
Definitely send it in. And also, as we mentioned last week, if your track is opening again, you're having some opening festivities going on, some new events. Also send those in, because we're definitely very interested in seeing what's going on all around the world.
Yeah, and if your local track does open, take some pictures and send them to us, and give us some information about where it is, what it was, and anything interesting that happened. If there's competition on, or if it's just a fun session, let us know. If you guys give us photos, videos, information, we can share it and we can discuss it, and we'd love to do that.
Definitely. I'll also bring my camera in 1.5 weeks when I'm going back to the track again finally.
I expect at least 1,000 photos.
I'll try. Might be a long episode then.
I have my camera ready to go when my local tracks are reopening, and hopefully that's not too long. I think maybe a week or two after you is my gut feeling, Taj, but something like that anyway.
Would be nice. Would be nice to get back to regular programming and seeing some action out on track here and there.
It'd be nice to fit on my overdose parts I've got here. It'd be nice to fit my new parts. I'm saving it until I can get to a track.
You have some stuff to try out still, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sort of waiting with buying some upgrades so I can before I can drive again. So maybe that means that in 1.5 weeks I have to do some shopping.
Yes, let's hope so. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. I really appreciate it as always. And if you like what you see, drop us a subscribe and share the video if you don't mind. A reminder, we also have the audio podcast, which this one will be going live tomorrow. So if you want to listen on your way to work or while you're at work or something like that, you can find that at the links provided below or in the usual places on iTunes, Spotify, Pocket Casts, that kind of thing. And if you want it somewhere for a podcast and it's not there, let me know and I'll get it added. Yeah, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.